Okay, thank you for tuning in to this Tuesday, February the 2nd, 2016, Organic News on Awake Radio. And my first live guest is Dr. Stephen Zunes, who was on just a couple of months ago, professor of politics and international studies at the University of San Francisco, where he serves as coordinator of the program in Middle Eastern Studies. He's recognized as one of the country's leading scholars of U.S. Middle East policy and of strategic nonviolent action. Professor Zunes serves as a senior policy analyst for the Foreign Policy in Focus project of the Institute for Policy Studies, an associate editor of Peace Review, a contributing editor of Tikkun, Tukkun, and co-chair of the Academic Advisory Committee for the International Center of Nonviolent Conflict. So thank you again for joining me, Stephen Zunes.
Great to be with you again.
So we're going to pretty much talk about Hillary Clinton and her running for the presidency. The article that I was reading, what we can expect from Hillary Clinton on Israel-Palestine. That was one of your articles that I read because I feel like that is a really blatant elephant in the room. I don't know. It's almost like mind-boggling, really, at this point, how this is allowed to continue.
Yes, it is quite striking. Indeed, it's reminiscent, I think, of the struggles during the Cold War, where the United States would support various dictatorships in Latin America and elsewhere, and despite horrific human rights violations, Israel, of course, unlike many of these dubious allies during that period, is a democracy, at least for its Jewish citizens, but it is also maintaining a very undemocratic rule over large numbers of Palestinians in occupied territories, and in recent years has been engaged in a number of armed conflict with extremist groups where the bulk of the casualties were Palestinian and Lebanese civilians. Indeed, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, the United Nations Human Rights Council, and quite a few Israeli groups, in fact, including B'Tselem, Breaking the Silence, other groups that have raised serious concerns about the policies of the right-wing government. Also, of course, the very fact that finally there is a moderate leadership head of the Palestine Authority and President Abbas and the Fatah leadership, which dominates the areas of direct Palestinian control in parts of the West Bank. They are willing to accept the state of Israel alongside the state of Palestine, where the Palestinians would get only 22% of their historic homeland. But the Netanyahu government, of course, is very much opposed to any such compromise. In fact, they are colonizing with these illegal settlements large swaths of the West Bank, which is the part of that 22% where the Palestinians hope to have a national homeland of their own. And what's striking about this is that even though this is a very controversial policy, especially among Democratic voters, Hillary Clinton takes a very right-wing position. She is a very strong supporter of the Netanyahu government. She has defended Israel's military actions, even specific war crimes that were condemned by human rights groups, condemned by Senator Bernie Sanders, condemned by the Obama administration, but she's come to their defense. She has even gone to photo ops at Israeli settlements in the occupied territories. She has attacked the International Court of Justice, notable international jurists, human rights groups, others who have raised concerns about Israeli violations of humanitarian law. She takes a very, very hard line it's not an issue. I mean, for some people, of course, it's an either-or issue. You're pro-Israel or pro-Palestine. The polls show most Americans, believe that both Israelis, Jews, and Palestinian Arabs have a right to statehood and security, that neither has any right to kill civilians on the other side. But Hillary Clinton, again, is one of the more hardline senators on this when she was in the Senate. And as Secretary of State, she moderated her position somewhat since she was under Obama, but now that she's no longer serving his administration, she's swung back to a pretty hardline perspective in support of the right-wing elements that dominate the current Israeli government. And
so you also say that her support for the U.S. invasion of Iraq was in violation of UN charter.
Oh, very much so. I mean, countries cannot just launch invasions of other countries.
Right.
That's prohibited in the UN charter. It goes back to the Nuremberg principles. This excuse, she thought they had is groundless. So for one reason, for one thing, the evidence supporting the administration's claim was very, very weak. There are a number of leading strategic analysts, myself included, that informed her that the Bush administration's concerns were questionable, and we provided quite a bit of empirical evidence to back what we were saying. Scott Ritter, the head weapons inspector for UNSCOM, had told the senator that Clinton that there was Iraq had achieved at least qualitative disarmament. Their National Atomic Energy Agency had declared that Iraq was nuclear free. There were quite a bit of evidence that she should have paid attention to, but instead she basically parroted the line of Bush and Cheney that Iraq was a threat, and they had a nuclear program, they had chemical weapons, they had biological weapons, they had these long-range missiles, right. They had ties to Al-Qaeda. Absolutely none of that was true. And again, Bernie Sanders and other members of Congress were also, saying that this is not true. But Clinton was among the right-wing minority of congressional Democrats that sided with the Bush White House to vote to authorize that illegal, unnecessary, and tragic war.
And you also say that her election would bring the return to a Bush administration neoconservative rejection of long-standing international legal principles.
I'm afraid that indeed is the case because she is certainly more liberal than the Republicans on many important domestic issues, not as progressive as Bernie Sanders and Martin O'Malley or a lot of other Democrats, but certainly a lot more so than the Republicans. On foreign policy, however, she is one of the her positions are very much like the Republicans. She has, in addition to supporting the invasion of Iraq, she continued supporting the war. She even said that she would have supported the war even if she had known there were not weapons of mass destruction. She only said it was a mistake a couple years ago when she was preparing to run for president. So it took her a while. But it's not. And she's taking very hardline positions. They mentioned on Israel-Palestine. She's supporting the Iran nuclear deal, but she's also been more hard within the administration. She took among the hardline positions. Thought we should threaten Iran more and negotiate less. She has been a big backer of Arab dictatorships in Egypt and Bahrain, where she was a big push for supporting the Bahraini monarchy when they were gunning down nonviolent pro-democracy protesters in the street. In Yemen, she pushed when they had a pro-democracy uprising to hand over authority not to a coalition of pro-democracy groups as the people were demanding, but to pass on the leadership to the vice president of the dictator. which then resulted in this horrific civil war we've seen since then. This was not the only occupation she supports. She supports Morocco's occupation of Western Sahara. Right. That one is particularly questionable because the Clinton Foundation's most recent big conference, which took place in Casablanca in Morocco, was largely funded by a government-owned phosphate mining company, which is illegally exploiting the natural resources of Western Sahara, which is recognized by the United Nations as a territory under foreign belligerent occupation, a non-self-governing territory, and effectively a colony. And she's praised the Moroccan monarch for his stand on human rights, especially women's rights, even though women political prisoners are singled out for sexual torture in the occupied Western Sahara. A very nasty situation there. And it's not just the greater Middle East. I mean, she supported the coup in Honduras when she was Secretary of State, even as the White House was raising concerns. She has historically pushed a big neoliberal kind of foreign policy. She's attacked the United Nations. She's attacked the International Court of Justice. Yep. She's particularly hostile towards a ruling that said all countries need to abide by the Fourth Geneva Convention. It was a unanimous ruling, except for the U.S. judge. And she's even gone after the International Criminal Court, the one that goes after, the war criminals in Darfur and other, places where there's genocidal campaigns. In fact, she supported a bill that would prohibit the United States from cooperating with the ICC in any way, cut funding to governments that sign on to the ICC, and even go to authorize the president, if he felt it was necessary, to use military force to free any Americans or citizens of an allied country held by or on behalf of the International Criminal Court, which, as you might guess, got the Dutch government very upset because U.S. helicopter gunships went across the North Sea to attack The Hague, to free people from the ICC. It didn't go over very well. We're talking about someone who basically shares kind of neoconservative view that the United States should not be bound by basic principles of international law and any kind of international organization like the United Nations, like the International Court of Justice, like the International Criminal Court. Should just get lost because we're big, we're powerful, we can do what the hell we want. And it's just that kind of arrogance which resulted in the disaster of the Iraq invasion and occupation, which, as we've seen, has just made things worse in that part of the world by causing the growth of ISIS and other extremists and sectarian violence and the like.
And do you think all of these actions that you've described have anything to do with the fact that she's corporate backed?
Oh, I don't doubt that there is some obvious financial interest in this sort of thing. There's a letter that her campaign really pushed that was signed by a bunch of former State Department and other high government officials, praising her and trashing Bernie Sanders because Bernie wanted to cut military spending and was less into military intervention. And it ends up over half of people who signed that letter have ties to military contractors. And of course, Wall Street and the military-industrial complex are very, very close tied in with each other. I mean, it's not necessarily a quid pro quo. I don't think it's necessarily a conspiratorial thing, but obviously, it's part and parcel of the same kind of mentality. And again, her push for higher military spending. When we already over half of our discretionary budget goes to the military already. We have by far the highest military budget in the world. In fact, we have one of the, except for a handful of small Middle Eastern countries, we have the highest per capita military spending in the world. Despite the fact that we are protected by, two oceans and two weak and friendly neighbors. I mean, this is not for, barely 20% of our military budget is for defense. I mean, the rest of it is for this large network of military bases around the world, and to better enable us to intervene militarily in other countries.
I wanted to just play a few minutes of some of her talk from last night, and then maybe we could just address some of the points that she makes, and you can say whether or not you think that she'll be able to fulfill what she says.
Are you tired? And I will admit, it is 16, 18 hours a day, 6-7 days a week.
Okay, wait.
On Bernie Sanders right now.
Wow! What a night! An unbelievable night! What a great campaign! This has been an incredible honor to campaign across Iowa with so many of you to make the case for the kind of future we want for the Democratic Party and for the United States of America. There is so much at stake in this election. I don't need to tell you. Every single one of you who came out for me, who worked so many hours, from my young organizers with energy and passion, to the families and friends across this state, I am deeply grateful. Well, I love all of you. But here's what I want you to know. It is rare. It is rare that we have the opportunity we do now to have a real contest of ideas, to really think hard about what the Democratic Party stands for and what we want the future of our country to look like if we do our part to build it. I am a progressive who gets things done for people. I am honored to stand in the long line of American reformers who make up our minds that the status quo is not good enough, that standing still is not an option, and that brings people together to find ways forward that will improve the lives of Americans. I look back over the years of my involvement from that very first job I had at the Children's Defense Fund, and I know what we are capable of doing. I know we can create more good-paying jobs and raise incomes for hardworking Americans again. I know that we can finish the job of universal health care coverage for every single man, woman, and child.
Okay, I'll just pause it there. So, yes, she's talking about, jobs and health care. Mm-hmm. I mean, what has she done? Like, what are her accomplishments?
Well, not a lot to show on certain levels. I mean, it's ironic that she says, I'm going to bring universal health care when, she's attacked Bernie Sanders ingenuously for his support for a single-payer system, saying, it's going to cost too much money. Well, if we hadn't spent so much money on the Iraq War, which we're still spending on, which is literally to the trillions of dollars now, not just for the war itself, but for the veterans' benefits for the injured veterans, the amount of money we're spending on the wars that one spawned, from the rise of ISIS and everything, the interest in the national debt, because she insisted on paying for this war without raising taxes on the wealthy, and And so that's just disingenuous. But also the fact that she says, it will hurt the incomes of middle-class Americans. Yes, middle-class Americans would have to pay more taxes under single payer, but they would not have to pay private insurers. They would not have to have deductibles. They would not have to. I mean, it's all the models, so it would actually give more disposable income, to Americans. So that's there's a lot what one can say. The good news about Bernie Sanders' campaign is that even if he doesn't win, he has forced her to take a more progressive stand on, or at least pretend to have a more progressive stand on domestic issues. Unfortunately, there has not been enough attention on the foreign policy question, and because they are so related. Again, even where some of her proposals for improving Obamacare, again, I don't. None of her proposals come close to universal health care, but they do improve somewhat on a number of areas, which I suppose is good. But I mean, it's definitely good if you can do it. But again, I don't think you can do it if so much money is going to these overseas adventures that she insists that the United States get involved in. I mean, Barack Obama has bombed 7 countries since becoming president, and yet she has criticized Obama for not being militaristic enough. And it's really disturbing to think that the Democratic Party would nominate somebody like that. I mean, this is because if you poll Democrats, they're actually much closer to Bernie Sanders on both domestic and foreign policy, but particularly foreign policy. And and especially among young voters, I think one of the reasons that young voters are going so overwhelmingly for Bernie Sanders is that it's their generation who saw their brothers and friends sent off by Hillary Clinton and other war supporters to fight and die in Iraq, or come home, maimed, either physically or emotionally for life. They've seen, the huge cost of this war, meaning that there's less money for grants and low interest loans for college. It means less jobs here at home. And one thing that was really amazing in the exit polls in Iowa last night was that of the Iowa caucus goers under 30 years old, they went 84% to Bernie Sanders, only 14% for Hillary Clinton. And I think that says a lot about the real concerns that Democrats, particularly young Democrats, have about nominating someone who takes such a hard line when it comes to overseas wars, supporting dictators and occupying armies, attacking international institutions and the like, and who holds on to this kind of neoconservative hegemonic worldview.
I mean, clearly, if Hillary was elected, because she's so backed by corporations, I mean, she would not be able to do anything really to help the people that need it.
Yeah, I mean, there's no, again, if you look at the campaign contributions, it's pretty obvious, where her bread and butter comes from.
Right.
And those, I mean, you can't say that she takes these positions she does because she gets their money. It could just as easily be she gets their money because she takes their positions. But whatever the reason, she's taking some pretty lousy policy positions, particularly on international affairs, and that given her corporate support, she wouldn't have much of an incentive to shift that. And again, one of the problems is that if she becomes president, of course she's going to be, or if she becomes the nominee, she's going to be attacked from the right by Republicans who are even more militaristic, even more hardline. And the way the mainstream media works is that Hillary Clinton will be considered the left wing of the debate. And so, and the majority of Democrats who are much more moderate, much more progressive than she is on not nearly as hawkish as she is on foreign policy, we're going to be completely ignored, because the debate will be between these, bomb into the Stone Age, let them glow in the dark, invade, bomb, the whole Republican, hardline thing, and then we have and Hillary is depicted as a liberal alternative.
I actually have some numbers of her and Bill between 2007 and 2014 received $139 million from talks to Wall Street and from her book sales. And from 2013 to 2015, she gave 12 speeches to Wall Street banks, private equity firms, pocketing $2,935,000 fundraising. Yeah, she basically turned her campaign into a fundraising machine. 4 of the top 6 Wall Street banks top her career contributors.
Yeah, it's pretty scary actually, because it's clear the people who are lining her pockets, and of course she and Bill themselves are quite wealthy, and that's one of the obscene things about her. I think supporting the invasion of Iraq, because the vast majority of the 4,500 Americans who were killed were poor and working class, disproportionately people of color. You didn't see Chelsea Clinton running off to enlist, and I think that that underscores the importance of raising these kinds of issues. The ones who lead young men and women off to war are not the ones to fall. They, to paraphrase the old Phil Oakes song, and there's a very big, as you're implying, there's indeed a very close correlation between corporate power and the propensity to support military intervention overseas.
So then I'm just going to move now to another writing that you sent me called Hillary Clinton's Vote to Invade Iraq. And that whole ridiculous weapons of mass destruction nonsense. Former Senator and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is the only candidate for the 2016 Democratic presidential nomination who supported the invasion of Iraq. The only one.
No. Yeah, there were originally 6 candidates, so now they're down to 2. And, she is the only one. This idea that, everybody supported the war, that was balloon. The authorization to fight Al-Qaeda after 9/11 got nearly unanimous support. Representative Barbara Lee was the only member of Congress who voted against it. But there was a lot of debate before the October 2002 authorization of the invasion of Iraq. The majority of Democrats in Congress opposed it. And again, as I was mentioning earlier in the show, she was briefed by people who knew it was a bad idea and questioned all the rationales for it, which indeed later proved to be false. And furthermore, we also informed her that if we did invade Iraq, we would likely be bogged down in a long, bloody counterinsurgency war amidst the rise of Islamist extremists, sectarian violence, and terrorism. That would prove to be very costly financially, politically, and strategically, and in terms of human lives. So, it was not decided, there's no way she could have known. Baloney. She was informed. And if you compare Bernie Sanders' speech, where he raised all these questions, and compare her speech, where she just parroted the Bush-Cheney line, it says a lot, I think, about, who is more qualified to be president, even though she supposedly has more experience, because she was a Secretary of State. And I've just been amazed at the twists and turns that Hillary supporters have been doing to try to rationalize for her to be. I mean, they're saying things like, it's just to put the inspectors back in. That's ridiculous. It was an authorization of war. Saddam Hussein already agreed to have her inspectors returned, and she voted against the Levin Amendment, which would have authorized force if Saddam didn't allow the inspectors to come, but instead she voted for a version that gave Bush a blank check to invade Iraq whenever and under whatever circumstances that he wanted. And again, it was. I mean, this was a no-brainer. I mean, I wrote the cover story in The Nation magazine, which came out a couple weeks before the vote. It was called "A Case Against War," where I spelled all this out. And tragically, I was pretty prescient. I described exactly what would happen, and unfortunately, it did. And she got multiple copies of this article. People were quoting from it. I mean, and there was testimony in Congress. I mean, there was a lot going on. That if she'd taken time to look into it at all, but she was dead set to have us go to war regardless of the facts.
And part of the people that contribute to her campaign, I don't know if they come from weapons manufacturers. I mean,
she does get support. From those that are tied to the military industry. But of course, remember, a lot of these big corporations, have both, military and civilian components. I mean, General Electric, Boeing, et cetera. It's all in there. And of course, American companies made huge profits off of this war. And some people say, she couldn't help it. She had to show that she was tough because she needed to be elected. But that's silly because, for one thing, it cost her the nomination in 2008. I mean, it was Barack Obama's anti-war stance that was decisive in getting people to support him instead of Hillary Clinton when she was supposed to be the odds-on favorite. Every female senator who voted against the war was reelected easily. The next time, again, this idea she had to be tough to show that she was a woman, she could be pro-military, or she needed to be elected president. Again, none of those rationalizations make any sense. And even if they did, what kind of person would send 4,500 Americans and hundreds of thousands of Iraqis to their deaths for the sake of their political career? I mean, that raises questions as well.
I wanted to ask you, do you really believe that Bernie Sanders has a chance to get in and to implement his policies?
I think he has a chance. I'd say less than even, but certainly a chance of becoming the nominee. And I think he becomes the nominee, he'd be elected. Polls show he actually runs better than Hillary Clinton. Because he has a lot less negatives. Even though he's more to the left, he has a lot less negatives. He would inspire a lot of grassroots support that Hillary would not have. I mean, I think if he got the nomination, he'd almost certainly become president. The second part of your question about implementing things, of course, you have a Republican majority in Congress, and you have a lot of pro-business Democrats that would thwart, I think, a lot of his domestic agenda. But I think it would certainly bring the debate to the left, and they would be able to get through some things, more things, better things than there would under a Hillary Clinton administration. But again, neither Hillary nor Bernie would be able to do a lot of the good things they might otherwise do because of the Republican lock on Congress, at least for the first couple of years. That is why I think the foreign policy side is so important, because that's where the president can act unilaterally in a lot more ways than they can in terms of advancing their domestic agenda. And that's where I see so if you say, well, it doesn't make any difference because Congress will stop them from doing good stuff on domestic issues. Okay, even if that's true, the huge difference on the foreign policy front is I think it makes it all the more important.
Do you think Hillary Clinton should be brought up as a war criminal?
I mean, I think one could argue that those who supported the invasion of Iraq were in violation of the United Nations Charter, which under Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution, those that make these kind of international treaties the supreme law. So there's some legal questions there, and again, in the Nuremberg principles, we hanged Germans and Japanese for the crime of committing aggressive wars. I've never known of a case where individual legislators who voted to support such wars faced prosecution. I think that might be. I think the main architects of the war, which of course are the people in the Bush administration, would be the ones I think who would be more deserving of standing trial. But even though I don't think Clinton or the others should necessarily be prosecuted as war criminals, I think it is important to recognize that they are in many ways complicit in one of the worst of all possible war crimes, that is of helping to make possible an illegal and unnecessary war.
And they just continue and continue and continue. I mean, the last time I spoke to you, we were talking about ISIS and all the weapons and everything that just keep going over there and basically funding ISIS, I believe, is what we talked about the last time.
Yes, I mean, ISIS is a direct outgrowth of the invasion of Iraq, as we talked about. There'd be no ISIS if there were not for the U.S. invasion.
Yeah, this whole war on terror is nothing but a big charade. And this is the thing that the more the United States intervenes militarily, the more the backlash. I've been traveling in the Middle East since the early 1970s when I was a teenager. And at that point, I could literally go anywhere in the Middle East and feel safe as an American. I certainly cannot do that now. Right. And what's happening in the interim is the more and more we've militarized the Middle East, the less and less secure we've become. And Bernie Sanders recognizes that it's just simply not working. But Hillary Clinton wants more of the same. And the Republicans want even more than that. They want to make it even worse. So it's unfortunate because it's like the Democratic side. That most Democratic voters really want to change. They do not want to have this endless wars, and yet Hillary Clinton's trying to present herself as progressive. You have a lot of women who are really eager to have the first female president. You have people making all these rationalizations. Oh, her vote for the Iraq War was just a mistake. As if she pushed the I button when she meant to push the nay button. I mean, she knew darn well what she was doing. But they're again, these rationalizations for her support for the war are ridiculous. And what's also, it also shows, again, based on these other things that we talked about earlier, her support for Arab dictatorships, for the Israeli occupation, for the Moroccan occupation, defending war crimes to U.S. allies, attacking international institutions, supporting the Honduras coup, et cetera, et cetera. It's all part of the same. Her support for the invasion of Iraq was no fluke. It was no aberration. So I just wanted to. Hillary Clinton's vote wasn't for war, but simply to pressure Saddam Hussein to allow UN weapons inspectors back into Iraq. That's one excuse.
I mentioned that briefly earlier. Yeah, he'd already agreed to have the inspectors back in. They're working on the modalities and there was a bill that would have allowed for war if he did not allow the inspectors in. But she voted against that and instead voted for the version that said Bush can invade Iraq regardless of whether the inspectors come back in or not at the time and circumstances of his own choosing. So that rationalization is completely groundless.
We have just about 2 more minutes left, and a couple of months ago, Daniel Burke from the LaRouche PAC tried to ask Hillary Clinton about reinstating Glass-Steagall, and he basically got, thrown out of the place. It was actually here in New York. Mm-hmm. And, Glass-Steagall is one of the things that Bernie Sanders is out there about getting reinstated.
That's basically just a common sense financial regulation that would prevent the kinds of abuses and crimes that made possible the financial crash of 2008. And again, it's disturbing she hasn't taken a stronger stance, though again not surprising, given her the kind of people who fund her. I mean, I don't trust the LaRouche people myself, but there is this question about there are a whole series of questions, I think, regarding her financial ties, and I think many of them manifest themselves in taking the kind of hawkish foreign policy that she takes. And I think voters really need to be more aware of that part of it.
Well, I want to thank you again, Stephen Zunes. Sorry, I already closed your bio, but so you're at the University of San Francisco.
Yeah, that's correct. Department of Politics, where I am service coordinator of the program in Middle Eastern Studies. Nice talking to you today.
Yeah, you too. Thank you very much.